Hey, folks. Thank you for being here tonight. We will wait a little bit for Facebook to come on as well before I get going, and I can see people. Oh, Glen Ellen, Illinois. I always like seeing you come in from Illinois, from Glen Ellen. That because I went to a skating school in Glen Ellen when I was a kid. Oklahoma City. I know Oklahoma well, of course, having a waitress there, and I see that Facebook is here from Minnesota. So welcome aboard, everybody. I will get right down to it. People asked me to come on and talk today about the killing of Alex Pretti in Minneapolis today. And I'm happy to do that. As I always tell you, I'm happy to come on if something big happens, but I wanted to make sure that I had enough of the story that I wasn't simply screaming, oh my God, this happened. And so since it happened, I've actually, if you watch me this morning, you will see I'm wearing exactly the same clothes, including the same coat I had on during this morning's broadcast, because I haven't really gotten up since then. Which is not, of course, how any of us expected to spend today. So let me start in on what we know happened. And then I will tell you a little bit about what the larger story is and perhaps what we can do. And I want to be clear, I am incensed. I am furious beyond articulation. So if I seem very flat today, it is because of that fury. All right. So what we know happened today, and I've written everything down so I would get it right, is that at least 7 federal agents this morning at about 9 o'clock local time shot and killed Alex Jeffrey Pretti. He was a 37-year-old man who was an ICU nurse at the local VA hospital. Now, you will note there that I said federal agents. I did not say ICE. It is not clear right now from what agency they came. And it looks, again, remember everything I'm saying is very new. It looks as if he was not an ICE agent, but the shooters were not ICE agents, but were rather from Customs and Border Patrol. And that I've told you about before. That is a division of another agency that has been infamous for its out of control, violent recklessness. That's the agency that is headed by Gregory Bovino. And it looks as if they're the actual shooters, not ICE. We tend to use ICE or Immigration and Customs Enforcement as a catch-all for all the federal agents. But let me remind you yet again that the Department of Homeland Security actually has a number of pockets of agents that it can use. And while ICE is the biggest, has the most people in it, the most violent currently appear to be those from Customs and Border Patrol. All right, so as always these days, there was video of the shooting, a number of different angles on the shooting. And it is easy, if you see them, to put together what happened. There are a number of videos, as I say, and one of the earliest ones starts with Pretti on a street in Minneapolis, directing traffic around an area where there are ICE agents. There are not a lot of people there. It's not a huge crowd, but there are definitely people on the street. Oh, and by the way, there are definitely people on the street. I don't recommend that you watch these. These are very, very hard videos. The agents begin to harass a person near Pretti. And I'm not making any assumptions about names or anything at this point, because that's still a little, at least to me, not clear. She is the person is pushed to the ground by an ICE agent, and Pretti reaches down to help her back up. As he does that, a federal agent shoots pepper spray into his face. He has a camera in one hand, and with the pepper spray, he lifts up his hand to block the pepper spray. Agents then pull him to the ground from behind him, and they begin to hit him. And there are, it looks to be 7 of them. he doesn't really appear to be fighting back. You're seeing people talk about a struggle and so on. To me, it looks like he's trying to keep his head off the ground. He keeps trying to push himself up to keep his head off the ground, which of course is something you would likely want to do if you're being jumped by 7 people. During that struggle, as Pretti is face downward, an agent takes a gun from his waistband, the back of his waistband, or what certainly looks to be a gun and is being identified as a gun. He has not reached for it or anything. His hands are on the ground. Then the agent turns and leaves. He is starting to walk away with his back to the scene when one shot rings out and Pretti stops moving. After that, 9 more shots ring out as agents, and we don't know if one agent fired all 10 shots or if there was more than one agent who fired all 10 shots. At least I don't know that yet. As they continued to fire into what appeared to be his lifeless body. People have compared it to an execution. It certainly looks like an execution. And after the shooting, the agents disperse very quickly. They walk away, and they apparently made no effort to preserve any kind of a crime scene. So that's what we know happened. But let's talk about how to make sense of what has happened since then. Immediately, minutes after this killing, officials from the administration came in front of the TV cameras and called Pretti, said he was engaged in domestic terrorism. They claimed that he was violent, that he had attacked the officers, and made a great deal of noise about the fact that he had a gun. Well, it appears he did have a gun in his waistband, and he was not reaching for it. He also was a registered gun owner with a legal permit for a concealed weapon in the state of Minnesota. So he was not reaching for his gun. You're going to see that all over social media from people trying to justify this. And the gun was not on his person when, at that point, 6 officers are holding him down, and he is shot 10 times. But the administration jumped right to this person is a domestic terrorist or is engaged in domestic terrorism. There's actually a little bit of a difference in the wording there. And you're seeing in a lot of media that the administration is calling people domestic terrorists with a T. I've been very cognizant of the fact that the quotations always say the person is engaged in domestic terrorism, because I suspect of a September 25 memo from the President of the United States, essentially saying that anybody who engages in any activity that seeks to stop him from putting in place his policies is engaged in domestic terrorism. And because there is very specific legal language that defines a domestic terrorist, they're actually going with that vague terrorism. I mean, that's a rabbit hole that maybe you don't care about. But I think it's important because I think what you can see, at least what it looks like to me from being in it, which always makes for a bad vantage point, that they are deliberately expanding definitions of things like terrorism in order to criminalize opposition and to justify the killing of somebody like Alex Pretti or Renee Good or some of the other people who have been shot, but so far have survived. They jump right to the idea that Pretti was engaged in domestic terrorism. But it was very interesting because immediately federal officials refused to let local police officers or a statewide Minnesota agency called the Minnesota Bureau of Criminal Apprehension, which specializes in police shootings. They refused to let them have access to the crime scene, When that happened, the Minnesota Bureau of Criminal Apprehension went to a judge and got a warrant to get them access to the crime scene. Nonetheless, the federal officials refused to give them access to the site. They have also refused to give out any of the names of any of the ICE. I'm sorry, I keep saying ICE, but that's because it's a catch-all now. The federal agents who were engaged in the shooting. So they have done everything they can to keep people away from an investigation. And there have been other rumors about what they have done that you may have read. So far, I have not seen them corroborated, so I'm not going to repeat those right now. If you have heard other things that the feds did, they may not be true. I could not verify them with more than one source, and so I'm not going to tell you what those were. Nonetheless, Minnesota police are siding with the people of Minneapolis and of Minnesota. They are trying to investigate, they're trying to talk to witnesses, they're trying to find videos and so on. And that's the first, I guess the first important thing is that the administration has come out and blamed the victim yet again. They have blamed the victim despite the fact that once again, as in the shooting of Renee Good, there are many videos proving they are lying. This is not negotiable. There are videos from all different angles proving they are lying, just as there were those videos in the killing of Renee Good. But the administration is doubling down on that. They are, and just as recently as a few minutes before I came over here, Secretary of the Department of Homeland Security, Kristi Noem, once again accused Pretti of going there to cause mass destruction, to hurt people, and to kill law enforcement officers. And that is a complete fantasy. That is not what happened at all. So that's the first important point here. The second important point is that law enforcement in Minnesota is standing firmly behind the people of Minnesota. Now, I know a lot of people have wondered about police officers, and of course, the Minneapolis police are only one police force and so on. But they have made a big point since the killing of George Floyd in 2020 to have good relationships with the people. They brought in new people. They're trying to have a good relationship with the people of the city, and they have come out and stood with the people of Minneapolis. They're not siding with the feds. They are siding with the people in Minneapolis. That's the second point that matters here. Another interesting point is that in Minnesota, a gun rights organization has come out and expressed extreme concern about this shooting. That's a gun rights organization, which almost always sides with the radical right. They are not doing so. They're not saying this is, we're dead against you, but even them expressing great concern is a knowledge point that is worth having. All right. In addition to the fact that the feds have tried to keep Minneapolis law enforcement and Minnesota law enforcement from investigating what happened, the Department of Homeland Security has also taken over the investigation, despite the fact that immediately after the shooting, it came out with a statement that said that Pretti had approached U.S. Border Patrol officers, that's where I'm getting the Border Patrol thing, with a 9mm semi-automatic handgun, that he had violently resisted as officers attempted to disarm him, that the officer fired defensive shots, and said this looks like a situation where an individual wanted to do maximum damage and massacre law enforcement. Pure, straight-up lies. And what they did is that after having said that, they took away the FBI's ability to investigate that shooting, and they say they're the ones who are going to investigate it. You know what that means, right? So here's another point to be made here after this second killing. in by guns that we know of. I do want to emphasize that the Department of Homeland Security is killing people in the detention camps. And I'm not going to go down that now, but that is important to remember as well. But in addition to or part of that whole takeover of this investigation is that the administration is now openly killing U.S. citizens, and it is lying to us when we know that's what they're doing, because thank God for all those people with their cameras on their phones that are recording, because we have evidence that they are doing it. Nonetheless, they are continuing to do it. And that is a really important demonstration of authoritarianism and even totalitarianism. We know we're lying. You know we're lying. We know you know we're lying, but you have to believe us anyway. They are doubling down on that. I'm going to come back to that in just a second, because there is another thing that matters here. And that's that this is all they have got now. There's nothing they can do to say, oh, well, here's a little bit of murky ground, or, oh, there was a law for this. Or, normally when there is something that is fuzzy, that the American people don't like, there's an escape hatch. You can muddy the waters somehow. There wasn't somebody watching, or there was a law that said we could do that, written in, I don't know, 1802 or whatever. This is stark. This is all they've got, is to try and force us to believe a lie when our own eyes tell us differently. Why would they do that? And here's where I want to go with what we can take away from this. It is very clear that the person out in front on this issue is Stephen Miller, the White House Deputy Chief of Staff. A lot of people have been talking about Miller for a long time now. He came to Trump by way of Jeff Sessions. He was on Trump's first attorney general, who had to step down because he had contact with the Russians that he lied about. Miller came to Trump through Sessions, and Miller is an unabashed white nationalist. But there is more than that. That is, Miller is a big fan of a utopian novel from 1973. I'm not going to give you the title of it. I'm sorry, dystopian, not utopian novel from 1973 that posits that Western civilization, and by that they mean white people, although usually white Christian people and usually white Protestant people. There's some wiggle room on that because, of course, we know that Miller is Jewish. At least his family was Jewish. Posits that civilization of it, the book was written about Europe. Miller, of course, is in the United States, is being invaded and taken over by people of color who are going to destroy it. That those people who believe in this are literally at war with invaders coming in from countries where people are people of color. This is, of course, a pure dystopian fantasy. It is racist beyond belief, but in the scheme of American history, it is more than that. That is this fantasy that somehow there are these hordes of people coming, and those of us who adhere to the principles of democracy in the United States of America that say that we are a nation of immigrants, that this is what has made us great, what the economists say and what the politicians say and what people like me say because we understand American history, that we, even if we are white, are aiding and abetting those hordes coming in. If we are defending the rule of law, if we're defending due process for immigrants, that we too are the enemies. This argument should not be seen in isolation, either from its racist roots, but also from its sort of application over arguments that Americans made beginning really in the 1980s about the fears of communism taking over the United States with the conniving of people who were already in the United States. And you see that all the way back to the 1950s with Joseph McCarthy, but you really see it in the 1980s with movies like 1984's the one in Colorado, it's not Top Gun, which is what comes immediately after that, Red Dawn. With like Red Dawn, where the whole idea is communists are taking over America with the conniving of politicians in the United States. That idea that people of color are destroying the United States with the conniving of politicians and people like me in the United States, or people who believe in democracy, are they fit right over each other. And that then suggests that people like Miller, people who believe in this idea of of being replaced by people from elsewhere, who believe that somehow their civilization is not being honored and supported by immigrants the way that reality has actually played out, but is actually under siege by what almost seems like a zombie army. That then means that any violence directed at people who are not on their team can be justified. And that's really important, because that's not politics. That's not business as usual. That are the fever dreams of a disordered mind. And that seems to be what is driving this army of federal agents into our streets to kill people who are exercising the rights that have been given to all of us throughout American history in the Bill of Rights. The First Amendment, the right to peaceably assemble, the right to protest, the right of a free press. You know, those rights, the rights from the Fourth Amendment, that you are protected from unreasonable searches and seizures of your home, for example, something this administration has thrown out. The 14th Amendment's protection of due process, the idea that they can't simply throw you on a plane and say, we've decided that you're a member of a gang, which now we know the U.S. intelligence did not believe was accurate, and ship you to a prison where you're going to get tortured. Those are our birthrights as Americans, whether you came here and got your citizenship a minute and a half ago, or whether your parents and grandparents and great-grandparents, all the way back to before the Pilgrims stepped off a fishing boat in the late 1500s. That is what they are trying to get rid of. On the other side of that are those of us who believe in our democracy and who believe in our rights and who believe in our communities. And that's what happened today on the streets of Minneapolis, is that a man who was an ICU nurse who was trying to help somebody up got sprayed in the face with pepper spray and then got shot 10 times on the sidewalk. How is this going to play out going forward? This is a moment. This is the moment at which it becomes too late for people to say after this, oh, I didn't know. I didn't know what was going to happen. It's out there now, between the shooting of Renee Good, and I'm just going to throw in here the kidnapping of a 5-year-old and a 2-year-old, but I'm not going to talk about that today. But the shooting of Alex Pretti as well. It is no longer possible for people to say, oh, I believe in law and order, and so I support Donald Trump. This is the moment when people have to say, regardless of party, Either I believe in democracy, I believe in our Constitution, I believe in the rights that the framers wrote into that Constitution, or they have to say, no, I am siding with the likes of Stephen Miller and believing that my existence is under siege by immigrants. And anything it takes to stop that, regardless of the Constitution, regardless of American citizenship, regardless of rights, has to happen. In the wake of this moment of choosing, politically, it seems to me there are important levers moving and that people like me anyway can push. One of them is that immediately Democrats are, of course, outraged, but they have also come out and said, there's no way we are going to fund DHS until ICE is reformed. That's fine because this thing is coming up next week, but I'm sorry, the funding bill is coming up next week. But remember that in what they call their One Big Beautiful Bill Act of last July, the Republicans gave a huge sum of money to the Department of Homeland Security, and part of that is a huge pot of money for ICE and Border Patrol. That money's still out there. Defunding Homeland Security tomorrow doesn't matter as long as that money is sitting out there. So you're going to hear a lot about that then, and them saying we're not going to go forward with this. That's great. I mean, that's the position, the only position the Democrats can take. But don't think that's going to change anything tomorrow, because I believe the pot of money they're sitting on, I believe, is $1.7 billion. Of course, a lot of it's spent now, but I'm not going to go down that funding thing. Although if you're interested, I have talked about it in the past. That's one thing. But here's the other, and this is the reason that I am so angry. You've heard me say this a lot. The Republicans could stop this tonight if they wanted to. Elected Republicans could stop this tonight if they wanted to. And here's the thing. You know how many Republicans that would take? 16 Republicans. 16 Republicans voting with the Democrats. This is a country of 340 million people. 16 people could stop this. And you could actually impeach and remove Trump with 23. 23 people could stop this if they wanted to. And here's why they might want to. Even if they don't care about what's happening in the streets, even if they quite like Trump or anything like that, the reason they might want to is that Trump is underwater on every issue across the country, but he's also underwater in his approval rating is negative in 40 states. 10 of those states are states that voted for him in 2024. And I'm getting my numbers here from G. Elliott Morris at Strength in Numbers. What that means is if Republicans are hoping to get reelected in 2026 and 2028 and not see the absolute decimation of their party, now is the time for them to push back. And that's a place where we have leverage. Calling your members of Congress, your Republican members of Congress, and saying, if you ever want to see us vote Republican again, you must stop ICE. You must get rid of Stephen Miller. And frankly, I think Trump's on his way out. So I worry less about that, but go for that one if you want. Although I think that one's going to be harder to do because a lot of people like to pledge their loyalty to Trump, but they actually don't like Stephen Miller at all. This is the time to really ratchet up the pressure on Republicans, because that's the only piece of this equation that can do anything right now. You can scream at Democrats all you want, but they don't have the votes. There aren't enough of them. Enough Republicans say it's time we stop this, because this can't go on for another 3 years. And retain American democracy. We're going to lose it. Now is the time for Republicans to understand that they must choose between American democracy and a regime that is destroying it. It is worth noting that in the demands that Attorney General Pam Bondi has given to Tim Walz, the governor of Minnesota, is a demand that he hand over the voting lists of voters in Minnesota, and he is refusing to do so. It seems pretty clear Trump is trying to rig the 2026 election, determined to stay in power, because these thugs all know now that if the Trump administration loses power, they are going to face the law. And none of them want to do that. So this is going to get worse before it gets better. But rather than simply tearing your hair out and crying, both of which are legitimate responses to what's going on in America right now, if you are interested in increasing pressure to make this end, the place to put that pressure now is on elected Republicans to say, you could stop this, and you are not. You are choosing not to, because we have made it, I've been trying to hold that door open for a very long time for them to say, it's time. You could say something, it's time. Trump's goons are murdering American citizens who are exercising their constitutional rights in the streets. And the time to stop that was back in 2015, as far as I'm concerned, but it cannot continue. The thing to remember going forward in all of this is that what people like Stephen Miller and the goons in the street, and Trump to the degree there's anything left between his ears, what they are declaring war on is us, is American communities, is, people digging each other out of the snow, people bringing food to each other. The very communities that have always made America great. The communities that are bolstered by things like the Bill of Rights, the fact we can talk to each other without fear of the government coming down, and that we can gather however we wish, so long as we're doing it peaceably, and that, we're protected from having somebody battering down our door and saying, we're going to plant something in your house so that we can send you to jail, the way they do in places like Russia, and the fact that we can demand that we have the right to have a trial, and that we can't have the government just throw us into jail because it doesn't like us, which is what happens in countries that do not have those protections. And one of the things that I think Republican senators have believed anyway, because I've seen this referred to in speeches in the Senate, is they keep thinking that it's the courts that are the last line of defense for American democracy. And as I always say, by the time the framers got around to writing about the courts in the third article of the Constitution, they were kind of like, let's go have lunch. Let's just have some courts. They're really specific about Congress. They're really specific about the executive. They're not specific about the courts. Because who's the last defense of American democracy? It's the people. It's the people who are protected by the Bill of Rights, and who recognize that we have those rights and that we must come together to defend them. It's the people who have to make our voices known now, because the courts are going to get around to it. They are, they've been deciding against Trump, right and left, but it takes time. The American people demanding an end to this is what is finally going to end it. And I want to be very clear when I say that, I mean peaceably. I mean peaceably. There's nothing that kills a movement faster than violence. We know that throughout our history, especially in America. I can't speak for other countries, but this is the time peaceably to push back, not just on the Trump administration, But the people in it, like Kristi Noem and Corey Lewandowski and Stephen Miller and all the people who have defined those of us who oppose them as participating in domestic terrorism when we're just speaking our minds, but also to remind the Republicans in office that this is make or break time for them. They can side with the American people. They can side with our communities. They can side with the Constitution and the Bill of Rights. They can side with, Teddy Roosevelt and Fannie Lou Hamer and Sitting Bull and Abraham Lincoln and, George Washington and Thomas Jefferson, or they can side with Stephen Miller, the neo-Nazis, the KKK, and those people who are trying to turn this country into a fascist state. Now is the time for choosing. I thank you all for being here and for choosing each other in this moment. And all I can say is we have the numbers, we have the principles, we have humanity and the ultimate goals of self-determination that democracy is designed to put into place. And some of us, as we are doing this, are making the ultimate sacrifice. I suspect when he woke up this morning, Alex Pretti didn't expect that he was going to become written into the history books. And I bet he would prefer not to have been. But those of us who are still here can continue to carry that torch forward.